Irashaimase! Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this Saturday we have Galaxy Warfighter, a retro-styled indie shoot 'em up. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer Qplays and publisher Joybits, Galaxy Warfighter released on Nintendo Switch and PCs in mid-April. So, this is not a title that I can recommend. It has the cardinal sin of video games of just being dull. It's not a bad game, it's not a good game, it's just simply uninteresting. That's not to say that there aren't some things here that are worth having a look at, but at the end it's not enough to redeem it. So the game does have this really interesting upgrade system, where as you defeat enemies you get coins which you can use to get armor, shields which increase your health, guns and drones which increase your firepower, or special abilities like the shockwave and the stop time. So right now we're starting the game at mission 1, so this is basically how we are at base power. And as you progress through the game you'll gain all these abilities. But one thing to note is it's not actually possible to go back and play earlier levels. Once you've achieved higher levels, those are the levels that you're set to by default. And there are quite a few levels in the game itself, or rather missions as they call them. 100 missions total. Unfortunately, you're kind of seeing the depth of gameplay. So it's a horizontal scrolling shoot 'em up. Unfortunately, all we're doing, at least at this stage of the game, is dodging. The fire is set to auto fire, so there's not really a whole lot that, especially in early stages, you have to do other than worry about dodging the enemies. And really, throughout the course of the gameplay, that's basically all you need to do. As far as other abilities, we will get other abilities once you unlock the shockwave and the stop time. Those basically, the shockwave acts as kind of a nuke that will destroy all the enemies on the screen, at least if they're weaker, and deal heavy damage to those that are larger. And the stop time is pretty self-explanatory, it just simply stops time. So we find ourselves at the end of mission 1, and this boss, despite there being 100 stages, this boss is one of 4. Especially with additional abilities like the stop time in particular, the boss fights do become quite trivial. So moving on to stage 2, as we play through the game we do get additional enemy fighters added, but in a lot of ways, they don't really increase the challenge that much. If you just go with the idea that you need to defeat the enemies as quickly as possible, then each stage basically is the same. Your enemies are coming from the right of the screen, you have to destroy them, and if they happen to make it far enough left on the screen, they will fire shots at you, which, depending on the enemy, will have different patterns, and you have to dodge those. Rinse and repeat. So I myself have made it about a third of the way through the 100 levels, and it just never gets that much more interesting. It's just a boring slog the whole way through. So we do have a couple things that break up the gameplay dynamic just a little bit. Sometimes when you defeat an enemy, they'll leave certain power-ups, like the plasma burst or the plasma spiral, which will send shots out at the additional enemies that happen to be on the screen. You can also get a lightning bolt, which gives you an overdrive, which increases the damage your shots do. You can also restore health that way, and there's a nuke that just clears the enemies, similar to the shockwave that we have. So I'm going to take a quick second to jump to a different save so we can see how the game progresses at a later number of missions. Here we find ourselves at mission 34 with several upgrades. So we now have the shockwave, we now have the stop time, as well as upgraded weapons, upgraded armor, shields, and though there are more enemies and there's more variety to the enemy types, for the most part it's about the same. We have enemies coming from the right of the screen, and we're trying to defeat them as quickly as possible, collecting coins while we do so to ultimately purchase more upgrades for our ship and get to the boss to defeat the boss, one of 4. Hopefully this will be a boss that we haven't already seen at this point. Honestly, I don't know. This is the first time I've played this stage. As I mentioned as well, it's not possible to select which stage you're going to play next. You just start on the next mission that would be in order after the one you defeated. So, of course, 1 through 100. And that's basically what we have here in Galaxy Warfighter. Just the minus flavor here is that the game is just dull and uninteresting. It just kind of follows the same pattern, repeating over and over again, and just feels uninspired. On the plus side, though, I do enjoy the pixel art that's presented here, especially in the menu screen. I would have liked if the game could have had more of that, as there was a lot of interesting... Well, the menu screen itself just seems cute. And the backgrounds are interesting, but like the bosses, they're not enough variety to the bosses themselves and to the backgrounds themselves to be super interesting. As I mentioned, stop time just makes the bosses so trivial. So, there you have it. Galaxy Warfighter served up for your enjoyment, and yep, this just isn't one that I can recommend. So, that'll just about wrap it up for this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining me this week, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.